Hi, and welcome to this AI and C# video on the Microsoft Agent Framework. Today we're going to dive a little deeper into Azure AI Foundry, and more specifically the administration part of it, meaning the persistent agent client NuGet package that can create and delete agents and all the things around those agents. So here in Business One, we have a sample called AI Foundry.administration. And the persistent agent client is actually nothing to do with AI, with the agent framework, but we can access it from the NuGet package called Microsoft Agents.ai.Azure AI. So normally we have only used agents.ai or agent.azure OpenAI. So, but inside this, there's a dependency on the NuGet package that is called azure.ai.agents.persistentagent that agent framework and others can use in order to control the port. And the port we're talking about is, of course, the Azure AI Foundry, which have a separate video, but we can go in and control making new agents, getting hold of them, getting their threads, of what we have talked about, messages back and forward in those threads, uh, and even run them if we want to. But of course, we want to use the agent framework for that. So we have that one NuGet package, and we new it up with an endpoint and some Azure CLI credentials. You can't use an API key for this one. You need to use the normal Azure credentials in order to use it. And then you get the client, and the client have a bunch of CRUD things like files, messages, runs, and so on. So we have files, so we can upload files into the portal. That could be PDFs and Markdown and such things that we want to later then expose to a vector store, which we can also do the CRUD applications of here. And then we have all the underlying parts of an agent, the various threads, meaning the conversations, the messages inside those threads, and the runs of those threads. This part we will not use, and messages not really either, but threads and agents are the main two parts that are linked to the agent framework. And the agents themselves are under administration. You could have argued it should have been called agents, but for some reason they have chosen to call it administration. And what you can do here is you can either get existing agents up there by having their ID, like for example this, and then you can take the client and get an AI agent, so our agent framework agent, based on that existing one. So with these two lines of code, you can essentially have an agent that have all kinds of tools and all kinds of knowledge and all kinds of vector stores, and then just use them from there. If you don't have the agent already, you might need to create the agent, and there we have a bunch of settings. So I've taken every single setting out here, and let's go through them. So when you create an agent, you bind it to a model. So you choose what model should that agent be using when it's talking with the user. We give them a name, that's just for the portal so we can see them, and the same a description. So it knows, or someone can go in and read about the agent. Instructions is an important part. This is actually what is being sent to the LLM. So if we say speak like a pirate, the agent becomes a pirate agent. If we tell a bunch of information about some rules on how to behave, that is what is being picked up here. So don't confuse description with instructions. Description is just purely for information, not for the AI. Then we have a bunch of tool resources and tools themselves. And this, in my book, is a little strange that you need to do it like this, but you do. In that you create your tool and then you tell which resources it has available, but you also need to tell which tools it's allowed to call. I would argue that if I put in a tools resource here, it would also mean that it was allowed to call it. But for some reason, you need to define them both places. But there's various tools that you can hook up to. You can hook up to Azure AI Search, which has some configuration. You can hook up to code interpreters, file searches for vector stores. You can hook up to remote MCPs, which is not up in the portal as of this recording. And I've heard a bit of rumors that it don't work too well, but we will test it out in a separate video. Then you tell your tools, and for some reason, the Bing tool, which is the tool that you do for web search, you don't set up here. So I don't find it too consistent. I would say it would have been more correct to put it up in the tool resources. But again, we have separate videos on that. But else, you just tell, I want to have the code interpreter tool, and then you set up the various things that it can call in general here. Bit funky way, but it works. Then there's a few settings, and I think they regret these settings because, for example, temperature, you are not allowed to set them on reasoning models, and top P is something similar. So you don't really need to allow to set these, especially if you're using reasoning models. But if you use non-reasoning models, of course, you can still set them. But you can, for example, set a reasoning effort on these that you would need to do from the agent themselves. Then there's things like response format and extra metadata that you could put up, which I haven't really seen a need for, especially when we have the agent framework. And then when you have an agent like this, you can use your client to get your AI agent, so we can get it and use it from agent framework. And again, you mostly use your agents. If you've seen my 0 to first prompt, we also normally delete them again because they are persistent. And if you just sit and run this code again and again, it will build up new agents unless you delete them. So here's an example of how you can also use it to clean up. So for example, if you have a bunch of threads up there, you just simply take your client, you go into threads.get threads, and in my case, just find the first 100 and delete them one by one here. So it's truly just CRUD when it comes to this persistent AI. But of course, when we make our agents and use them, that's the interesting part for us, and that we'll see for each of the more interesting tools in a separate video. But for now, that was everything there is about the administration. See you in the next one.